All right, welcome to the Cougarverse. This is Cougar's version of the universe, as he knows it from the visions he had, dream visions, from experiences with death and what it seemed to have culminated through. And also, I'd like to introduce a moment of silence somewhere during my talk. There may be times that I'll just be quiet, and it may be after a paragraph, it may be after a sentence, it may be right in the middle of a sentence, but that's just a place where I'll need to go to collect with the deep again and make sure that I'm being on track with things. And it could be also seen as sacred space for you guys to also tap into, and we are a collective here and we all are united, so it's a good thing. It's not an awkward moment. So thank you for sharing this evening with me on the mountain. It's a great privilege to be here every time I come here, and there's lots of little whispers the mountain gives us for direction and many other things, whatever we need, as long as we're open to it, receptive. So I'm going to attempt 3 parts tonight in this story. I'm kind of doing it in reverse order, and we'll see how that goes. The first third may be on Buddhist terms. If you guys are interested in hearing some of that, we'll go a little bit into Buddhist definitions. The second part I'm going to try to thrust into the Cougarverse, and which has hardly been spoken before yet. There's places that I'm up close to speaking about them. The Cougarverse division is a little bit deeper teaching from the other stuff that I've been passing on. And the third part is the part I usually open with, which is basically there are groups that just want me to tell my stories of death, and they call it near-death experience, but I'm getting to the point where I think they're just experiences with death, because a lot of people understand the near-death experience to be brushes with death, and this is much more than that. And so I can kind of go through a summary of some of that, give you an idea chronologically of what I was through at certain ages, just a little bit of the stories, and then maybe just have some questions that you may have, or if you want to focus on a certain part of the story you think may interest you more, we can do that, because there's a lot of talking here. I have over 13 hours of stuff I can just say from my head. These experiences are more real than real, and so they stay with you very vividly. I can remember much of the detail. Some of the conversation it's harder to pull out, so I had put that into a book. I put it into writing form close to these experiences. I'm just lucky to be a person that kind of journals off and on, and so I would journal especially immediately after an experience to make sure I have it. Some of the details you think you're going to remember, and 2 months later you realize, well, I should have remembered that, at least that one sentence that was really important. I thought I would never forget. So that's where I learned the importance of journaling, and so it makes my story more accurate as well. And the book here for those stories is 7 Above, 7 Below, Mythic Journey into the Deep. And made that subtitle because there were so many connections that came out of my stories to ancient mythology and ancient mythic figures that turns out to be universal for mankind's progression through spiritual growth and worlds that we can all tap into. The experiences may be a little bit different for each person, but there's kind of a general sense of that transitional things that people may go through in these experiences, and for the most part may have nobody to talk to about them. You're all alone. So tapping in with the myth at least gives you a little bit of strength with it, should I say, a little bit of verification, I guess, helps. If you can't get it from anybody else and your family throws you out of the house, at least you can see some verification that what you've been through is real, not just your imagination and you're crazy, especially in this Western world. You know, there's so much that has not been accepted. It's slowly growing a little more in these future generations, holding the light. Atlas, is that what holding up the world. Yeah, it can be a great burden, especially since occasionally I did try to find teachers and none would appear for me, and only in just recent handful of years when I don't really need them so much now, but it's nice to have that support and that conversation. And that's where I'll launch off into the some Buddhist concepts here, because by talking to some lamas, Rinpoches, about this stuff, I've discovered that what they'll do is traditional teaching through their teachers. They want to keep their oral tradition pretty spot on, so they won't alter the words too much for American audiences. So sometimes the terms can get very confusing for us. We have a different orientation, but and I understand and respect what they're doing, because they're trying to hold true to how they were taught it, and they want to keep passing it on that way. But unfortunately, it kind of locks up in our Western mind a bit, and we can get confused and not understand. Even with hours of discussion by the Rinpoches, it just can fall short that way of their intentions. So something's got to shift, and it is shifting a little bit with some teachers that are American teachers that are trying to teach the Tibetan and other things too. They're trying to make this shift. This happens in all countries, you know, where it's all gone down anyway. You know, when it goes from India to Tibet to China, you see the shifts there if you look back a couple hundred years, and how each one puts their own little mark on it, and it's for their own culture, their own mindset, and so their understanding is a little quicker in the work they're trying to do. When I'm taking up your technique, I don't know if you want me to mention your name or not, but I figured it would work good instead of having lights beam down on my face. I said, I'm going to wear a hat like he did for his talks.
That's all to you, brother.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So, let me ask a question first. Well, I guess this is not first now. I don't know how long I've been talking, but I want to discuss Buddha nature a little bit, and first get your idea if you have looked at Buddhism or want to look at it, or have heard just things or direct teachings. It doesn't matter. If you have feelings about what Buddha nature really means to you, I'd like to hear from you. And
in the most simplest space, Buddha nature is the golden Buddha that lives within each and every cell and organism within all of creation. Every being, everything. Golden ratio, golden Buddha. That's my understanding of Buddha nature.
And my understanding is going to be just a Cougarverse understanding, okay? You know, it's just my point of view with it, but what makes most sense with me is
Well, can you respond to that?
Well, I want to see if there's anybody else that
Okay.
wants to open up about that. If you have any resonance with Buddha nature, what that might be, which is, I guess, a little different than Buddhist. No, there's another term I thought of. I can't bring it back now.
Well, the first word that comes to mind for me is non-attachment.
Non-attachment.
Yeah, when I think of Buddhism, seems like one of the main lessons.
When I think of Buddha and Buddhism, I get two very different. Well, I don't know. I guess Buddha I see as super light and giggly, and then
Super
kind of-
light and giggly.
Yeah, I guess all of my depictions of him is just light.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Buddhism.
The big jolly
has
Buddha
more
with
of
the
a-
smile.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's that big fat guy with that big smile on his face.
Yeah.
He's living inside of all of us.
They sell a lot of him across the street in wood and
Yeah.
steel. Or
Along with the non-attachment, but at the same time, unconditional compassion.
unconditional
That's the other side. So
compassion.
it's kind of those two qualities working
And to specify, when I shared about the Golden Buddha, it's just referencing enlightenment naturally.
The golden Buddha referencing enlightenment.
Well, when I
Like Buddhahood.
I first
yeah.
shared that I saw the Buddha as the Golden Buddha within, but that's just the reference for what enlightenment will be. So I just specified
Okay.
it a little bit.
All right, yeah, that's another way. People do that too, attaching it to the enlightenment part of it, which is where I look at the division too between Buddhahood and Buddha nature, because they're kind of subtle. So I had a formal practice for 9 years now, and I had some books in the 70s I just never picked up and read yet because I got led into other avenues of teachings until I was finally ready to take this up as a formal practice. And so I had certain ideas of what some of these terms meant back then, even in the 70s, from people that had been over in India, and they come back with their own interpretations of them. And there wasn't so much about Buddha nature to me back then, so I'll just refer to what I found out now. Pretty recently, for myself, all the talk got a little cacao bean stuck in the back of my throat there. I snoring buzz, but it tried to choke me up a little. So I like to try to find the most direct, simplest terms or of understanding for things, topics that can be really confusing and confounding and deep, and try to put a useful, oh boy, I can't believe I'm using these words, but useful engine or something to them. Wow, where's all this coming from? And for Buddha nature, I discovered it really is simply the authentic self. That's what Buddha nature is in the Cougarverse. It's the authentic self. And I look at the excitement of people who are going after this Buddha nature that they may not even have believed that existed within themselves until they got involved in Buddhist practice. And when I finally found that term that connects with my understanding of my life, you know, I always had that and didn't know it was called Buddha nature until recently. You know, and so it was a little upsetting to find out, well, I already have that and I'm reaching for more. I'm reaching for something I thought they were all reaching, but, you know, because I'm not there. I'm not there where I think I should be and where I'm going in Buddhahood or enlightenment, and this is nothing like enlightenment. But a lot of people seem to think in the Western world that this is enlightenment, that once we achieve this, you know, we can kind of rest back on our laurels and we've reached it. And in a sense, they're right that this is a very important thing to discover. You know, it's very awesome to be there, but it's not the end. This is actually, from my perspective, just the beginning. That once you touch into your Buddha nature and you can hold on to it, that is not the end of it all. There's more traveling, and I can even connect it into bodhisattva levels. That when Buddha became enlightened, he reached a higher enlightenment, I believe, because in his 100 lives before that Buddha life, there are stories of what he did in each life, what he was working on that Buddha nature. And so what I'm saying is, when you find Buddha nature and you go, oh, this is what it is, you know, and it's looking at from the eyes of a child and really having that innocence, and you're not holding on to all that pain and grief the same way that you had before. There's a lot that happens when you discover your Buddha nature, but when that happens, you want to look at maturing your Buddha nature. I guess that's the word I'll use. When you go into maturation, that's when you're working on the bodhisattva levels, and some schools in India and Tibet look at a range of 10 bodhisattva levels to go through in training, mind training, before reaching a more perfect enlightenment. Some systems have 12. It doesn't really matter too much, but it's nice for me that they have a system, that they've had so much detail. So many people have already gone through all this. They have an understanding of how to kind of graph it out, chart it out to help other people in their steps along the way. And of course, I have a personal feeling that they're kind of keeping that from us in my experience of showing bodhisattva levels. Because in the Western mind, we hold on to ego so tightly, and they're afraid of seeing people saying, oh, look at this, I'm at a 4th level bodhisattva, you know, and I know these guys are probably just bumping up in there in the first, and they're always comparing and choosing and all that stuff, and that's just the ego struggle. And I think that's what they're trying to avoid, whereas really when it's a pure teaching and you're doing it with respect and you're opening your eyes as a child, that you really, it's important to have this as a measuring tool to say, okay, I think I've done this, this, and that, and here's these other things I have to work on. So it kind of gives you a little better focus on some of these. And I think Atisha actually has a book, Atisha somewhere back in the 12th century, on the lamp to enlightenment, I believe. I saw it in a bookstore once, but I wanted to wait to purchase that. But flipping through it, it looked like he was kind of doing the same thing, where he was showing different measurements of where you might have gone and where you can apply yourself to keep going. Because I believe some systems in this country, they probably put you through the same things over and over and over again. If you go to another teacher, they put you through the same paces over and over and over again. And no, you want to move on from that. You know where you've been, but you kind of have to prove it to the teacher where you are. And anyway, that's the long path, the long way there. So I think that covers that one a little bit exhaustively.
Covers which one?
Pardon?
Covers which one?
The Buddha nature. I think we got Buddha nature probably there. Yeah, it's another whole conversation with Zen and getting enlightened now and not thinking about past lives, and we don't need to go into that one either tonight. That's not what you asked, but it made me think of that part of it. There's just so much involved in it. But Nirvana, let's go to Nirvana. That's another one that in the 60s, when I heard Nirvana, you know, they wanted to encourage us to reach Nirvana, and I thought this was a great thing. And Nirvana, to my mind, was to reach a heavenly state or even heavenly world. You know, it wasn't even in the physical world anymore. And so I kept that mindset for quite a while because I was not getting any teachings about it beyond what was coming back from India. And I found out early on within these 9 years of practice that nirvana is really a state of mind. It's a state of not suffering anymore or suffering less in a psychological sense. And I'm going, wait a minute, that's not fair because there's still suffering going on all around me. Just because I don't suffer as much, this is not nirvana to me. Nirvana is heaven. So I kind of had to deal with those concepts and look at it in the truer sense that it was really meant, which is a state of mind and being able to cope and deal with the struggles of the world and then no longer struggle with that as much. I think that might be also the term that they translate as being extinguishing the flame of desire. And some of that practice is looking at things that you're very attracted to and looking at things that you're unattracted to and actually are repulsed by, and taking those two extremes and try to bring them into the middle where you're not quite as attracted or repulsed by anything in life. So really, you know, a lot of the Buddhist practice you can't do in a cave. People used to make fun of the idea that, well, you could reach enlightenment, but wait till you come out in the street, you know, poof, where does your enlightenment go? And there's a valid point there because a lot of practice has to be in the world with real people, and you can really test what you've developed on your own. And so cave experience, you know, whatever you want to call cave, is important too, because you want some serious alone time to be able to go deeper. You know, less distraction is good, but you don't want to shut out the whole world completely forever or for 30 years, especially in the Western world, unless you're really called to do it. You know, there's nothing wrong with anything. So I thought that was interesting, extinguishing the flame of desire. But still, you know, if you desire enlightenment, that's still a desire, so we still have little tricky things here to think about what desire really is. And is there a good desire? Is there a bad desire? You know, what do we have? Should we not desire? So it's still an individual path as long as you're understanding what the terms really mean. And because of language, we have to speak to each other. And even just regular sentences without all these profound Buddhist words, we are really so misunderstood by each other. You know, I say one thing and it's heard almost totally different by someone else because they're putting their own little spin on what their own words mean, and that's, you know, totally acceptable. That's totally the way it always has been. And so we really have to go back and, you know, to understand each other, we really have to sit down with each other and and discuss things we just assumed between each other what they really meant, like love, or other things like that. Love is a little bit more, subtle of a word to use, but, or like what Bill Clinton said, what is, that's where he got stuck on the law and had a point there. They had to define what is to go further into what he had done in the past. So this kind of leads into enlightenment in that same sense. It's a complex term, and there is no one definition to it. It's the same thing. It has subjective interpretations according to who's talking about it and who's understanding it. So I kind of stay away from that word, except in a general sense. And I forgot to ask questions about those, didn't I? Those three, so I'm going to test you with the fourth one when I get to that one. Yeah, enlightenment would have been a tricky one to ask people, and then I wouldn't have an answer for any of you on my Cougarverse. Some of the teachers in America I know with enlightenment, they say things that just don't sound like enlightenment to me, because it is a lot of the same things about Buddha nature, finding the innocence and the renewal and things like that, and we're finding peace, and those are aspects of things, but for me that's not enlightenment. And other teachings, enlightenment is really like self-actualization or self-awareness, and that's pretty deep too, but that's not what I am going for with my enlightenment. I'm more looking like a enlightenment beyond duality, more of a creator consciousness, above cosmic consciousness. Cosmic consciousness can seem to a lot of people like enlightenment, and it's not. It really isn't, but it kind of pulls people along for a while until they realize there's still more going on than that. So I'm giving you a good one this time. I'll let you slide by the other two. So the fourth one will be emptiness. Would anybody like to describe what they think emptiness is, according to anything, Buddhist or whatever? Doesn't matter. Void.
Formless. Formless.
Formlessness.
Formless. Yes.
An open space that's not an open space that's not closed to any possibility, so that anything can be.
Open spaces. That includes possibilities. What's this?
Disconnection from beingness.
Disconnection from beingness for emptiness. Anything else? Anyone else?
I feel it depends on what version. Are you talking about the Buddha's version of emptiness? Because like the American emptiness is not a good feeling.
There's an emptiness.
Yeah. emptiness is either, something that's gone, or even the emptiness feeling inside can be a feeling of missing something, versus my understanding, like yours was very close to my understanding of Buddha nature. The emptiness is a state we attempt to reach, and can be more like the void, or this big space where all possibilities exist. I think it sort of depends on where you're looking at the definition of the word.
So you're showing both forms of emptiness, the Western mind emptiness that is probably a lonely emptiness, huh? And so it's like a separation too. And whereas the more Buddhist one that you're looking at is the form of the void, and you said something else there after that with that?
But her definition was very close. And I also feel like from the limited, and I have very limited teachings in like the Buddha, but that's sort of one of the purposes of meditation, is to try to reach that emptiness, I don't get there.
Yeah.
Time to time I do.
Well,
Very rare.
yes.
Because emptiness can also have, whatever's happening is also happening inside of it.
Whatever is happening, it's also happening inside of it. Is this what you said?
Yeah, right.
Anyone else want to take a stab?
How I think of in my little world is emptiness is the state that precedes fullness of being.
The state that precedes
fullness of being.
Fullness of being.
So that who you are can be shared as a fundamental state that has the ability to connect everything to everything because of the beingness that one is.
Uh-huh.
And it originates out of emptiness.
That's going to be hard to repeat to the microphone.
That's why I've been kind of keeping my mouth.
Because we're talking about emptiness within emptiness within. Yeah, I like that though.
I don't even know if this was already said, but just silence.
Silence.
Okay.
Okay.
Emptiness. My experience with that possible state of being is being so present that the past and the future collapse in there is a silence to it because I'm in a perfect listening state. And in that moment,
let me repeat some of that so I don't lose the whole thing, but you're saying that the past and the future collapse into the moment,
into the present
and
moment.
like silence becomes silence.
There's a certain silence underneath the capacity to really be present to the moment.
To be present for the moment.
Yeah, you're not your own input is just silence, and you're really in a perfect listening state as a conscious, active state of being. And that, to me, maybe there's another term in Buddhism for that, but that emptiness would sort of describe that, because I'm empty to any preconception of the moment. I'm really present for it's to experience the moment as it is.
Yes.
Okay.
So that would be,
You're experiencing the moment as it is.
yeah, because I'm totally present to it, and I'm in a perfect
Totally
listening
present.
state.
Yeah, like be here now.
Yeah,
Kind of
that's
thing.
another way of saying it.
Yeah.
Exactly. But it's a continuous state. It's not just the moment. It's a state of being.
Continuous. Well, that's the trick about being here now.
Yeah.
I discovered that once I was here now, that moment kept moving away from me, so I had to catch up with it again and be here now again.
Right.
But the now is always in flux when we're within time. So it's like, well, how do we do this and get into eternity where there is no time? So it gets to be quite an exercise.
It's
So-
like being in the eye of the hurricane.
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Yeah, we
still
have-
The eye of the hurricane is a nice place to be.
the still point
everything was
of,
going-
of where we live around it. But the thing is that the eye moves.
Yes, the eye
So if you
moves,
don't
so
stay in contact with
then
that
you
still
hit
point,
the edges again
It's
and
like,
and you get in that whirlwind.
exactly. Gotta move with that.
And you say, what happened? Why am I here again? I thought I came out of that. But yeah, hitting the other edge of it, going in.
Exactly.
The more I sit here and listen to all of it, it's so good because the emptiness is fullness, as everything in the universe is a paradox and a metaphorical reflection of our whole self and our empty self. So if emptiness and fullness are all here at once, if we're empty, we can be full. If we're full, we can be empty. Vice versa, just being present in that void, in that moment, in the fullness, in the emptiness, and whatever we want to call it or perceive it as.
Yeah, that's another thing you're touching on is the emptiness of the fullness.
It's all the same thing, just a matter of perspective or vibration or experience.
This is why I'm glad we're exploring this.
Amen.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah, just from my impression of the Buddha's teaching, emptiness as a goal, those who had achieved that were very specific about that goal. It wasn't just a vague concept, because it was central to their Buddhahood. Is that right?
it wasn't such a vague concept.
Yeah.
You're speaking about things other than emptiness too.
Emptiness as a goal, or
Emptiness as a
signature
goal.
Buddhahood. They had a very specific
Right.
idea of what that
Right.
state of being is, and that's why I'm sharing it from my perspective. But I'd like to hear more about
Well, this is why there's different terms.
their description of that state.
Yeah, this is why I'm discussing 4 major terms that they use, because they're each kind of specific within the true interpretation of what they are, and they get confused and mixed up a lot,
Mhm.
which is what I see going on tonight too. They're being mixed with each other, and so just take time later to think about the way I put each term into a nutshell. That way you can kind of pull into each one in that specific way. If you'd like to make those different comparisons, it makes it easier not to wander or get lost, because I know emptiness for me was never explained. So this was my excitement in the last 9 years, is I'll finally find out what emptiness is sometime.
Mhm.
If I keep reading the teachings and listening to the Rinpoches, somebody's going to tell me. And it turned out this last talk, just within a month or 2 ago, we had a Rinpoche come to town and give a talk on the Heart Sutra, and he was going to give us a couple hours on specifically emptiness. And so I'm going, yeah, I'm ready for that, and I have my notebook ready and everything, and he starts going into the traditional teachings of emptiness from the Eastern mind, and I see people starting to doze off here and there, and they're going and they're coming back, and I'm trying not to do that, but I do near the end. I start drifting a little bit, because it's like, okay, where are the catchphrases? What does emptiness really mean? Because the whole thing is explored. They say, well, emptiness is seen as being full. It's a fullness, but then they say emptiness is not really full. I mean, we're saying it's full, but it's not really full. And then they're saying, well, it's empty too, but it's not really empty. And then all of a sudden somebody who's kind of enlightened will rattle through things like no eyes, no nose, no touch, no feel, no thinking, no death, no end to death. And so all the opposites and polarities come up, of what it is and what it is not. But for the most part, what they do is they tell you what it's not. And so it takes hours to tell you what it is not. And then you're waiting for what it is, and they don't tell you what it is. And I don't understand that, because it is there. The answer is there. And just so far in my experience, they haven't done that. And it popped into me. I don't know if it was from reading something else and seeing it, but when I got the answer, I had to go to someone else who was a scholar in all of this, who's read all the books that I haven't gotten into yet myself, because I knew he probably had an answer to that. And he says, oh yeah, that's the answer to what emptiness. I could have told you that years ago, you know. And so I was like, I just lost my balance for that whole day. It was like I was really frustrated that it took this long to find out what emptiness is. Because the important thing is, and I'll tell you what emptiness is, the basic meaning of emptiness means that everything is connected to everything else. That's simply what emptiness is. And it can be described as other things, and they're tangible aspects of it, but emptiness really is, in a nutshell, that everything is connected to everything else. Now, when a teacher exhausts you through hours of discussing emptiness on all those things, by the time you get to this, if they even get to this, that's like a final realization that should not be a final realization. Because I think I see part of this whole thing of really having complex discussions of emptiness is because it is a very important thing to understand. That now we know that emptiness is everything connected to everything else. This is where the magic is of realizing this is where the teaching really is. This is what we should explore, is just how is everything connected to everything else. Not just intellectually, but how can we feel this? How can we feel the whole world is connected to us? Nature, other human beings, everything here is connected. And it's like we're in a physical, dense world, but there is all this interconnectedness that is going on all the time. Mm-hmm. And through the experiences with death, you reach a freedom to see that everything is love. Everything vibrates with a love that shouldn't even be called love. It's a word beyond the word love. And that is a part of that everythingness. So you're never alone. You might think you're alone because we're here in a dense world of darkness and you could be pushed away by other people, but you are still an integral part of everything. You know, isn't that wonderful? And so this is just me saying it in an intellectual way. The real teaching is to get to that point quickly. This is emptiness. Now try to reach in and practice how to feel that emptiness so that you're never alone. You never do feel the loneliness. You don't feel empty or full. You know, you feel everything. And you say, well, of course, I'm part of the grand design, if you want to use those words. You had a question there?
That's what the question as an experience I had today. I had wanted to share when you had asked.
Do you want to come up here with it?
If you want me to, I don't. Either way. Are
Yeah,
you recording or something? Or?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Down here. When you were asking about what emptiness was, I flashed to an experience I had today in Panther Meadows. I had gone up this afternoon. It's the 5-year anniversary of my eldest son's passing, and I had wanted to take a moment in the sacred spot to, try to connect and just have this moment with myself in the mountain. And so anyway, so I'm up there. I'm standing, looking right at the sun, and my intention at that moment was sort of to connect to his spirit wherever it was, but also connecting with the sun and the earth. And I had this flash. I mean, I know everything's connected. We're all from source, right? But I just had this flash. I connected with him and all things, I mean, like all at once. It was just overwhelming. It was so brief, it's hard for me to describe, but even knowing that everything's connected and feeling it are totally different. Mm-hmm. So I had this flash, but it was so exciting to me, this sudden moment of just, whoa, just this everything connected. And just like what you're saying, it was just this whoa, but then my excitement brought me, back into this human body, and it's like I haven't.
That's the trick.
But and when you had asked what emptiness is, my mind went to that moment today. But it's kind of been replaying that moment anyway. But I just wanted to share that experience, or my experience today, because I feel like that was a touch of this emptiness, So thank you.
Nice.
that was a wonderful little experience. Thank you for sharing. And that also makes me connect it to cosmic consciousness. There's actually a lot of emptiness in cosmic consciousness, which in my experience of cosmic consciousness can be either in the body or out of it, being drawn out into the air by this buoyancy, and everything on earth becomes clear. All the patterns and everything are understood, and all the difficulties, even why is this and that happening in the world that I don't like, all of a sudden that all becomes very clear, that there are definite purposes for these things that appear to be bad as well as the ones that appear to be very good. They're all connected, a part of everything, and it's beyond what a mind wants to grasp. It's like, no way, this can't be. We've got to get rid of some of these evil forces over here. How can they be a part of everything? And they are allowed to be here because it's a part of the purpose, whatever the grand purpose is beyond. And that's the enlightenment I'm trying to reach to, is to understand what all that grand design is really for, the whole play of duality and other things beyond that. It's the understanding of why there is all this pain, all this tough love in order to rise above. So I think that's about all in Buddhism, that section, unless you want to hear something else specific, or you can challenge me with a different question on it and see if I know anything about that from the standpoint of the Cougarverse. So we could do a little bit of Cougarverse. How about that? I think there was only one place I spent about maybe 5 minutes. I had 5 minutes near the end of everybody talking where I was, and I had it all out here, and boom, which was nothing, but at least it kind of started the whole thing. So for me, what I've come up with my experiences is a simple structure. Of course, simplicity really works for me. So we've got a circle or an oval that is not only like the Earth, but the universe in a very basic sense, as scientists have discovered when they've finally mapped out the universe. And it's very interesting too, with the maps that they generated for this by shooting different areas of space and piecing all the puzzles together. I don't think they really shot everything, but they had enough to project what the other tendencies were like in the places that we have not filmed, because this will take forever for them to shoot, tiny spots of the universe and connect them all together. But to me, when they showed the mapping in 3D and moved it looked like Indra's net to me, which is going back to emptiness, that everything is connected. And we're all jewels in this net that are sparkling, and we reflect each other and we reflect ourselves. So I thought that was pretty grand. And where was I going with that now? I'm going
Back
into that area. Somewhere in the Cougarverse. But it's that general shape. And it works like this, with the infinity sign at the top, and then we have 0 at the bottom. This is excluding the notion of duality, although duality does play in the Cougarverse as well as the universe, but it shows the unimportance of the duality compared to the other, that if you really look at 0 being at the bottom of it and infinity at the top, then you see a specific movement that we are trying to move with vibration. That at the bottom is absolute 0, there is no movement, there is no heat, it's cold. It's like one of my experiences of a hellish dimension that was cold. There was no love. There was no feeling of any kind of real passion in there. And it was extremely noticeable to me. And then at the top, the infinity is exactly what that is. It's an infinite type of compassion and love and all that we don't have. We understand there may be, and it's got to be, and there's no end to it. So we have no limitations if we go in that direction. And so I discovered that there are three pathways to go from absolute zero to infinity. And for some reason it does correlate with Buddhism, but I like that I've got a graph of this. It makes more sense or understanding to really visually see this. And we can use either side and switch them around either way. It doesn't really matter. But on one side we're looking at knowledge and wisdom. There's one path upward from zero. We actually start with ignorance and fear, and that's at zero. The ignorance is at zero. The fear starts as we start moving, and we're afraid of going anywhere. So that fear is there, and we project fear on everything, no matter whether it's loving or not, because we don't trust it. We haven't been there. And so moving up that arm in the Cougarverse, it eventually becomes knowledge. There's awareness, there's that duality, and so we gain knowledge from the experience, which helps us travel up further. And so now there's also a central, I like to draw a line through the center of it, and I say, well, this is where most of mankind is in a general sense, as we're on this center point between the two polarities. And that in the Western world there's a lot of value in knowledge. Knowledge is power and all this stuff, and you can use knowledge for your own selfish gain or anything you want. You can use it for good and with inventions and stuff, but at a certain point this knowledge starts turning into wisdom. So at the upper half of that arc is the development and growth of wisdom that one is trying to reach. That is one of the pathways to enlightenment, and it is also called in Buddhism the enlightened wisdom. And I don't see this spoken about a lot, but it is there. It's when the schools that try to be specific there are talking about enlightened wisdom, enlightened compassion, and enlightened power. So you can take those three paths to get up there, but eventually you're going to have enough lifetimes to develop all three of those. And so there's a balance in what you attain. So on this other end of it, we start going into the hate and exploring hate and learning the lessons of hate. We heard other people doing it, but eventually we learn for ourselves not to hate so much anymore, because the more we hate, maybe it comes back on us, all kinds of things like that. So the person in the middle, it seems, in the American family is people who will basically love their own family, but they don't trust their neighbors. Some do. There's variations of that. But you have to really invest a lot in your family, and you take risks with your family to keep them safe. And so there's loving bonds there, but you can't love the whole world that way. I mean, you'd be giving so much of yourself to everybody, it's going to exhaust you. So reason does kind of draw you in with those kinds of human love and reactions. But there's a breakthrough point in that where you start learning compassionate love. So it's a little different level of what we understand love to be. And so we start getting compassionate more until we reach the ultimate, where you have the ultimate compassion. And power doesn't get talked about a lot, I think, on the upper half, but Power, of course, is something a lot of Westerners go through, and I couldn't speak for other countries since I haven't been there, but I know there's all variations. But power here is for, materialism and corporations, and people are grown into this system that works to have talents and develop power to create more resources for peoples and themselves. It gets very complex, so I won't get into all that, but power is a lot through the solar plexus. So we really develop a big sense of power through the solar plexus, and a little bit through our heart for our families on this other line. But we're talking about power. So if we move up through power, then we get into the center point where I start looking myself at. There's bodhisattva levels here. You can use 10 bodhisattva levels of power at the upper half. That when you start developing the wisdom and the compassion, these powers may come into play too, and one has to deal with those and not fall down below into the lower power structures for self, I, me, mine. And so the different powers get explored on the way up to the enlightened power. But like I say, I think that it's just reasonable that all of these three pillars are explored fully, to reach full human potential. And so one of the tricky things to this whole Cougarverse is what I discovered, and I'll let you explore this on your own later, because there's a lot of things that could be said here that just won't be satisfied at this time with this. But I'm finding that for everything in the lower part between 0 and whatever midpoint is, that people are usually asking, what do I want? What do I want? And so all those cravings get to be explored with either the love, or with the knowledge, or with a little bit of power that we're playing around in the world with. And so we get our what do we wants answered, and people go up to a little higher places on the map for that, and when they start looking at others and say, what do I want for the world? So that gets explored too. But I look at the midpoint here of all of this and say that the upper half is really asking, who am I? Who am I? And the more you explore who am I, the more these wonderful things happen to you that never happened before. If you're leaving open to that, and you're slowly letting ego step aside, and you say, who am I really? If I'm not ego, who am I? And where have I come from? That kind of stuff. And those answers will come either internally, or experiences will occur. Of course, there's always teachers that will tell you all this stuff of who they think you are, and you can take that stuff with a grain of salt, or work with them and do anything you want with them. So I have that question a lot in my book, The 7 Above, 7 Below, is who am I? There's more like running into the beings of light, and that they ask me who I am, and I have to think about who I am, especially to them, not just to myself anymore.
What is there to think about?
Well, that's a trick word there, is thinking, isn't it? Yeah, what is there to think about?
Do we really have to think about who we are, or do we just know who we are?
Well, we do that too, but yeah, thinking about it can help one explore that, because then you're asking the universe that sincere question, who am I? So I'm looking at it from that perspective, yeah. But it's nice to just fall into that place, I mean, and know, you know, well, at least I am now, you know, and maybe you feel a little bit of love there and you say, well, I am love, and you go into that. So yeah, there's lots of things to do with it, but I just think personally that's less selfish to do than what do I want. And you think of diamonds and cars and other things that are great, family that loves me and they'll never run away, you know, that kind of thing. But who am I really gets into a lot of other questions you wouldn't have thought you would ask. And you find out how amazing you really are, you know, and you get rid of your self-doubt and other things like that occur. So that's kind of a basic sense of the Cougarverse. That's kind of the skeletal structure of it. There's more in that may come out in different teachings as I go on in different places. Because then there's other things that come in. The teaching of the elders that was given to me by the beings of light explores more of this thing of what we can all do, no matter what faith or beliefs we have. There's basic human movement that we can have to explore self and make ourselves more useful or better people, better individuals. And the 7 above, 7 below, which correlates with the 7 virtues and non-virtues. It's kind of a kindergarten school in a way that, you know, if you are non-virtuous all the time, you're bound to realize that non-virtue is not paying off. You know, it'll catch up with you if you're hurting other people, since we're talking about emptiness, you're also hurting yourself. Whether it comes back to you in this life or another time, it'll come back. That karma kind of sneaks in there and knows who you are, and it knows what you need. And it's not a bad thing. It's just lessons that we all need in life. We're not doing anything bad. We're exploring everything that we need to explore. So just remember that, you know, we're all precious jewels. So it doesn't matter what we do. There's no judgment from above or anywhere, from anything that can really see what's going on in the totality of everything. And I think that's important. That's an important lesson of the NDE, the near death. All the people I know and all the written works I know, that if they go through a life's review, there's no judgment from any of these beings or forces. The only judgment comes from the individual themselves when they actually see what they have done, because it's kind of an overview of everything that they've done is all thrown together in just a few moments, and you get to see the whole picture of what you have caused or created in life, whether it's good or bad. So yeah, the judgment is funny. You know, it's all set up. You know, the cards are rigged. So, and it's a perfect system that way. We judge ourselves, so we may be hard on ourselves and we may not. It really just depends upon what we need to learn. If we know we need to really make some big changes, yeah, we could be hard on ourselves, and that's the way to do it. And say, wow, maybe I should try to start changing some of this. And then you do for a while, and then you fall short again. It's going to happen. You know, we still learn. We've got plenty of time to do this. It's not just one life. These are just physical bodies. You know, we are spiritual beings. The other part of the near-death experience is knowing your immortality. It's not just a belief. It's not just a faith or something that some religion has given you. And maybe it's true. I should believe in this faith over here because they say I'll live after death as long as I follow their precepts. Well, you know, these things can work in their own ways too, but for a person who is the fortunate or unfortunate experience of dying and coming back, realize for certain that we are all immortal. We never die. I think that's one of the first things Buddha said when he came out of his enlightenment is I am immortal, I will not die. And the Highlander would say that in the movie too. you know, but I don't think that gets quoted very much for the Buddha. I know an old German philosopher had written that in one of his books, and so it stood out for me there because they just, for over here, they start with the serious stuff like the Buddha started trying, he didn't want to teach because he didn't think anybody would learn or listen or hear. You know, there's a lot of obstacle there that makes it a very difficult mountain to climb. So the other beings just told them, you know, they kept trying. He says, somebody's got to do it. We want you to do it. You're in the position of doing it by reaching enlightenment. Please help us out, because all that darkness, we have ways to break through it. And of course there is, well, if you don't do it, somebody else will, but we know you are important in that sense that you can pass messages down. So he finally broke and said, okay, I'll try to teach. So they go through all the teachings and stuff. But I don't see it very often. It should be more frequent that they do tell the part where when he first became enlightened, he says, I am immortal. I live forever, because that's for everybody to hear. Mm-hmm. You know, we are divine beings in that way. If you want to use the word divine, it's just incredible.
You also have to know your audience, because
that's true. That's why he taught several different levels. And they got frustrated about that too. Well, why did he teach them that way and he's teaching us that way? Does he think we're stupid or something? And there goes the ego flying around, you know, but he's just doing the best he can to give different types of people different ways of growth, you know, different things they can attach to. So it's just like a monkey game in a way. And that's part of what he saw, you know, well, I can't teach because it's going to get convoluted that way, and yeah. So it's like, well, we still got to do it. Damned if you are, damned if you're not. You know, it's the world of duality. So it's the same thing. You know, I could get a lot of flack for some things I'm saying, but I just have to put stuff out there. You know, I have to say something. I've reached the same level where these beings have told me to put this information out. It's an old teaching, it's an ancient teacher, and there's nothing new. It's just that I have a new way of presenting it to a newer world. And so that would bring it back, instead of having been lost and devalued through all these centuries. It's now, there's a new energy in it that is very sacred. Do I have any questions here before I go on? Yes.
I was curious to hear if you have any more thoughts to share about if good and bad exist.
If good and bad exist. Any more thoughts about if good and bad exist?
Those are labels that we put on things.
He says these are labels we put on things.
Yeah, there's only two dynamics that take place in the creation: love and fear. Fearful things.
Love and fear.
Love and fear. Love can be thought of as positive. Fear can be thought of as negative. When people are coming from a place of fear, they will do things that are negative. When they are coming from a place of love, they will do things that are positive. Most people come from both dynamics. Part of the work that we do humanly is to be consistent in our approach to a given state, so that we can be conducive to the life of others, ourselves, planet, creation, and so on.
I should have had you come up here. That was long enough to have recorded on here, but it did reflect a lot of what I was saying or trying to say about the Cougarverse, about the duality that it does exist in this zero to infinity, the part of loving and the part of fearing, and people working with both, learning, exploring.
Yeah, what we humans don't realize is you cannot have infinity and diversity without fear. Fear is to diversification, what love is to connected integration, as he mentioned. And it's
You should come up here if you want to say any more,
okay.
because we're losing most of that. But we got what time here? I only have 15 minutes left, I think.
I'll make this brief. In the creation, when the universe became a representation of an ideal, the only way that you could get individuality, diversification, variable or variety is through fear. Fear individualizes love so it can exist in different ways. It's why we have species and so on. What we're looking at, our work, we are simply looking so that our life is a representation of that which is the existence of in a personal way, which is love, light, consciousness, and will. And then we simply apply ourselves according to those four dynamics. What gets in the way is the antithesis of them. And so we see those dynamics played out in many ways on this planet.
Is that coming from a particular teaching, or is that your own insight?
That's what stuff that I write about, the stuff that I focus on, the stuff.
That's your own insight.
Yeah, I'll be giving a talk on the 23rd of the month about that.
Okay.
Nice way to sneak that one in.
I have like a very short, simple perspective. I don't need to go up there, but to me, good, bad, right, and wrong are very much part of our 3D experience.
Good, bad, right, and wrong are part of our 3D experience.
Very much so. It's a very big part of our third dimensional.
It's all good.
Right. I mean, but in the 3D world, there is good and there is bad. Like, if you're bad, you go to jail in the 3D world, okay? If you're good.
If you're bad, you pay for it if you get caught.
Right. So
sometimes if you're good, you go to jail.
That's true. Sometimes if you're good, you go to jail.
I'm simply saying, in this 3D human reality, there very much is good, bad, right, and wrong. When you get into quantum and you keep leaping deeper and deeper,
then there's
that
an understanding after that quantum.
Well, once you shift into quantum, everything's balanced.
Right.
So here's quantum. Right. The shiatsu, any sacred symbol is quantum. So as we shift into quantum and beyond, the good, bad, right, and wrong.
That should have been up here.
Oh, sorry.
But yeah. So I can't
me,
really repeat all that either, but so let's go. We had one more question, I think, before I move on here.
It was just sort of talking about what he said. Do you want me to come up there? It won't take long.
How long is we've got like 10 minutes at the most right now.
It's a little different in that you said fear and love. Fear is more negative, love is positive. But and that's all true. But I think of fear too as contraction.
Fear is contraction.
Yeah, fear is more
when you
contraction.
look at fear and love,
love is more growth and
love
expansion.
Is growth and expansion.
And what he said, I've never heard about the individuation. Fear allows love, but I can see that even in looking at that. If you're, if you're in the state of fear, or a cell or an atom or a person's in a state of fear, you're going to contract, and all these different contractions, leads to the duality, the polarity, and then whereas love is growth and expansion and more oneness.
That goes into the who am I kind of thing, the expansion into everything. And so now just I have to move on to the ending of it's actually supposed to be the last third. We don't even have time for that, but that's okay because these stories are the most common ones I usually share at the beginning. So it's been nice having this interaction too, and getting to understand where we are, where we all are within this interconnectedness that we share. And so for the purpose of the book where these lessons came in, it was 11 years old. I had my first experience with death, and I came out of a swing set and my diaphragm stopped working and I went up into the sky and I experienced things on a surface level. That universal love was there, though I knew my immortality at that point, 11 years old. I saw some of the pain of the world and understood that, and I also felt the universal love that was all around. So I had all that to kind of juggle with at a young age, and couldn't really tell my parents or anybody at the time because it wasn't our swing set, and I found a way to get on it when the neighbors weren't home. And so falling out of that, no, I'd get in more trouble if I said anything about that. So yeah, there's payback on that, I guess, of not being upfront and learning lessons at 11 years old. So every experience beyond that, or pretty much everyone, was every 13 years. So at 24, I had my second experience with death, where I was on a motorcycle and got hit on by a car coming the other direction in traffic. The sun was blocking her view enough to where she just swung in front of me and threw me up over my handlebars, and my body crumpled onto the ground, and my soul, or authentic self, stayed up in the air, and eventually went into a tunnel of light where I went and visited heavenly temples. You know, I'm just using these words to have some kind of connection with things, or conveying a little bit. I met 7 beings who can be considered like the 7 flames before the throne of that creator being. I kind of envision a place where they're the 3, the Trinity that comes out of the one creator. And I call the creator really the uncreated creating. I think that's the position of that power. And so in creation, there's a Trinity that comes out, and from that Trinity comes the 7 that I met. And these can be seen as the 7 highest virtues that we will become in that growth from the 7 below to the 7 above. So they shared with me not only that universal compassionate love, but also future prophecy. That was another story for another time. It's also in the book 7 Above, 7 Below. I really got a lot of detail in there. Such a short book really contains quite a bit of the essence of the lessons and where the whole thing is traveling to, that there is sense to this whole journey, and it's very universal. There's connected with myth. I thought I was going to stay there at 24 since I was being shown all this stuff, and I got sent back down and had to continue, which wasn't fair. You know, and a lot of near-deathers were saying that too. Although some came back because of family, so at least that was something. I didn't even have that excuse. You know, I had a wife and I had parents, but did I give them a second thought in heaven? You know. Oh, lordy, lordy, I had sinned and not thought of them. You know, and this was all, yeah, in that sense, we're all one. They were there. So they would be coming up soon. I'll just wait for them up here in this beautiful place of no fear, no pain, and, you know, all this wondrous stuff. There's no gravity, there's no hunger. Oh, yeah, it's so awesome, you know, to be here. And so the third experience was at 37, so that was another 13 years past that, but that was a negative experience for probably the most positive results that had come out of that. And being at the place of 0 where there was no love, and wow, and learning knowing that I was resisting their temptations. And I forgot the word last time I had talked here, what that was. Oh, now it came back. Okay, thank you. Thank you, because it's an important word. I found out later that I thought I failed the test in hell because I couldn't resolve that evil, that darkness, the no love and everything. But what I discovered from friends and the people who had studied this afterwards that were collecting these stories. They said, "Oh no, Cougar, you passed the test. You cannot be compromised by darkness, because I gave up my soul. I gave up my very soul to die instead of joining this darkness. I refused to join." And they spent hours working at me and trying to tear me down. And it wouldn't work. I said, I'd rather die than join you. I'd lose my immortal soul that I knew I had. I knew it was precious, and I had lost it to the darkness. It was all gone. So I felt in that moment there is a place where you don't have a mortal soul, and it may be part of the dark side's plan to do that, that they just made me feel that I was not immortal when we really are. It's part of the tricks that they use, but it's really tough love. I came out finding 13 years later, I found the story of goddess Inanna's descent to hell, and that there were at least 22 different similar things that occurred between her experience and my experiences. This blew me away. So I knew I was living a universal myth. It was not just my story, my personal thing. And so in a context of that is the Buddha went through that with his final initiation of duality, where he went through the temptations and moved away from them to reach enlightenment, and a few other individuals through history, same kind of thing. They went through that final initiation of darkness. They can't be compromised by that darkness anymore. So we can all reach that point where those temptations were no longer anywhere near as valued as the eternal soul that we have, the all precious souls that we are. And so I had other experiences too, and I had some dream visions that I had to do some things with the beings of light again, and within those visions they held me in those places long enough to give me other teachings. So even if I got excited, the excitement wouldn't pull me back out on the earth. They would hold me in those places. And they're very graphic. There again, those are in the book too, 7 Above, 7 Below. Mythic journey into the deep. And that's about all I have for that. I don't know if we have time for any questions. I think we're at the end. We're perfectly at the end. Okay. Thank you very much. If anybody is interested in the book, there are some up on the counter there. And if you want them signed after the purchase, I'm here to do that. Or if you want to talk a little bit afterwards, we might have to move outside so they can close this shop up. They've been very generous to allow us here to have a beautiful discussion like this with beautiful people. I really appreciate your energy in here and your willingness to come out and listen. Some of you again for more than once. And thank you very much.
Oh.
Hello.